Hello everybody, my name is Stefan Schulz and I'm the product owner for Conformiq Creator, and this webinar today is about announcing the new and latest release of Conformiq Creator, which is Creator 2.4.0, and I will explain the key features over the next 30 minutes. Please notice this is a listen-only webinar, so there is no way of asking questions in voice, but we do have the chat in the bottom, a main chat window where you can type questions at any time, and at the end of the presentation I will then go through questions and try to answer as much as I can. Okay, so let me just briefly introduce what I will talk about today. So we have basically three major new features in the tool. One of them, some of them related to modeling. The major ones are related to test generation, and then the last ones are to integrations. I will have about 10 minutes on each of them, and going to try to give some background as well as demonstrate these features mainly. So the first action is about combinatorial data. Combinatorial data has been actually in the tool since the beginning 5 years ago, but we have now made some additional effort in introducing a new action. It's called the combinatorial action. This action actually allows now to not only combine alternative values in single input actions, but also across multiple actions. So let me give a short demo about this. So this is should be a very familiar looking model. This is our login model, which is part of the web application. Right now, there's no kind of combinatorial data modeled here. What we have here is the model where I have actually been providing some kind of names and passwords, which are then listed. Basically here, this means I can have Stefan login, Armin, or Yori, or I can have either of these three passwords. And then basically, if it's a valid user, which is defined to be Armin123 or Stefan ABC, then I go to successful login. Otherwise, I close the loop and I return back. So when I generate tests from that, I get an optimal coverage. And what we've had in the tool for some time now is that when we click on the action, there is this data coverage option, which allows you to select, the combinations to be selected. But what's new in the tool now is that what we can also do is we can actually have the combinatorial action, and basically we select it like this. This is the last action in the standard menu. When we click on that, we see there's basically one parameter, which is the interaction strength. This interaction strength sets the kind of type of combinations you want to take. So there's the so-called two-way interaction, which is all pairs and all combinations. And now the way how you specify this is that you actually list all of the relevant actions that you want to combine. So I can do this for one or for more. So if I do this for one, basically here, you double click on this, and then basically you get the choices of which actions you want to combine in the menu. You select them, you save, and now you have basically expressed that you want to take two-way combinations of all of the data that's in these input actions. So when we now go to the Conformiq test design perspective, and we generate, well, let me just first delete these tests, and then let me generate. What we will see is there will, once the model is loaded, we will get a new checkpoint category appearing, which will list all pairs. Okay, so here it is, combinatorial data. If we expand that, we will get the listing. Here you see where it's the fields that it has been able to combine. So each of pairs that it will try to cover is listed, and then it will also show once the tests are generated in which tests are these covered. So this is actually the way that it is better to use this technique, to use the combinatorial action instead of using the data coverage option, because this way you can clearly spot in your model where on the in terms of number of tests, but also the length of the test generation. So this is so far so good. We've had this before. Now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to steal from one model, which is the simple web application, one of the activities. So remember the login was here and then I'm continuing, but let me do the demo, paste this activity here and reconnect it. So now what I've done is once I have a valid user, then I also basically fill out this item form, which is in the next screen. And here I've been feeding it with some values. So basically here again, it's possible to take pairs. And now to give you an example, I will add here also another combinatorial action using the same way. So select the action and then go in here. And then you can add to this. Now you see I have two possibilities. So the tool will figure out what is here in your diagram that you can actually combine. And then you can select both of them. So for example, the fill item form and secondly, the user form. So now basically I'm saying I don't only want to have all the values within this form entry here being combined, but also with the values of this form entry. So first are the login details, and secondly is the item that I want to buy in web shop. So notice also I can have multiple or as many kind of combinatorial actions as I want in my model. And so I can even keep this here. It will just mean that I get more test targets that I can do. So I save my model. I go back to the test design. Now I load the model. And then later I will also just do the tests. So I'm loading the model that I've just been modifying. And what we will see is now here we have actually also a second action appear. See, first this was the one that we have had originally. Let me just start the test generation already. And then the second one here that has been created is this new action. I'm shopping for something. And then there's the ability to take all the pairs of the usernames and passwords. And then here, this is the interesting part, is where we can actually combine all the passwords and users against all the items and all the quantities that I can shop. So, yes, and as this test generation is going on, you will also notice something that is actually we're not getting full coverage on all the pair coverages. Now, this is a good question. Where does this come from? And here we have to understand how combinatorial test generation works. So basically here we have said we want to take all the combinations between the fill form item and the user form item. But here in the middle we have actually a decision where we're stating that only Armin and Stefan can log in and with these passwords. But what these combinations that we have been generating are including are also all these invalid passwords. So see, for example, XYZ is a password which is not accepted, and quantity 1 is a quantity which assumes that I have been logging in successfully. So combinatorial data checkpoints are generally generated with the assumption that they can be covered. Now, if there is some constraint in the model, or if this is an invalid pair, then it is up to the user to select this as being don't care in the test target settings. So again, this is a combination here, as we have discussed before, which is actually not valid, and the same goes for this one. And as you can see, as always with combinatorial test generation, a review is required, and the test targets have to be adjusted in the cases where there is valid constraints in the model that prevent the coverage of this. So once I go through and I actually select these cases, you know, with invalid passwords and usernames and the combinations with the items, then you can see that we have here reached now the 100% coverage in terms of the reachable targets. Okay, that concludes our demo of the combinatorial part. So let's go back here. Yes. The thing is also that, again, I want to point out is that the data coverage option, which is part of the input constraints, we advise to kind of move away from using that. Starting from the next version, we will have actually quick fixes that will transition you to the use of the combinatorial action. Test generation options and added a couple of new advanced test generation objects. Now, this is a pretty major change, and this affects everyone that is doing modeling with Conformiq Creator. Basically, for those of you who have been working with medium or high complexity level models, they've had to work with a button which was the so-called, let me just show, the lookahead depth button. And this button, which you probably still are very familiar with, is basically has been discontinued. So let me just explain this. We're going to use a very similar model. Let me just go back here. So the model we use for the test generation option is actually the same, more or less the same. What we're doing here now is that we're going to look at these new layout of the test options. So here is what they used to look like. Here's what they look like today. And here the main thing is, okay, some things have been reorganized. So for example, this test selection box has been actually, put here in the test selection box, and then we have the test case end conditions have been put to the front. And here, this is the new change, time limit. So actually, there has been a new option introduced, which basically has the same effect as manually clicking the stop during test generation. And this is what, from here on onward, we believe users should use as their primary means to terminate a test generation. The handling of lookahead, which has previously been the main way of how to define the end of a test generation, is basically handled automatically underneath the hood now. There's still a relic of this lookahead depth existing. This will also move in the next versions into the advanced setting, which is called the maximum lookahead depth. If that's set to 0, basically that means the handling is completely automatic. So this option is the same and has been there, just been moved to the front. Then we can see there have been changes to the names of test selections. So we used to have a setting compact optimal mode and OSI methodology. Compact optimal is actually fewest test steps to test targets, which we believe is a much better way of explaining what this optimization is actually doing. And also the one test per unique requirement is the counterpart of the OSI methodology. So that means that we actually have even two different test optimizations available, which happen during test selections, and I will demo to you one of them, which is the fewest test, and the difference of this. So yes, and then also we have in the advanced section a new option called enable data distribution, which allows, in cases where we have multiple alternative data values, the tool to actually pick more even data distributions during test generation. Okay, so much for the explanation. So I have a model here. My options are set as we said. So this is our old option, fewest test steps to targets is the same as optimal compact. And we're having a time limit of 10, and the lookahead depth is handled automatically. So what happens here is I get the same tests that I would get with Creator today. Let's just take a look at this. Loading the model and generating the tests. So this again is this model with multiple users and passwords. So, and here we get it now. We get actually these tests. And I'm not sure if anybody has ever noticed this, but if you actually just take the login diagram, you get actually an unnamed test. And this unnamed test, let's just review this very quickly, is a test where we actually enter this Stefan ABC. And if we look at the model, maybe we can understand it a little bit more. if we see there's one test where I log in as Armin, one test where I log in as Stefan, and then there's these tests where we have the invalid users login. Now, with the invalid users, we are actually, first using an invalid, and then we need to use a valid name, right? This valid name actually happens to be Stefan. And this is why this test has actually just been generated, not because it tests any new data or any new control flow, anything new else, but it just tests this name Stefan faster. Okay? Okay, so again, it has been our default definition. Now when we go back to the test generation, and we go now through here, and we change this to this new option, fewest tests, right? Then we're going to get this notification that your test selection has changed, so your optimization may change, and it suggests that we will delete the test, and we'll do so. And now, when we regenerate the test from the same model, we see that we now get 3 tests. So this unnamed test has disappeared. And if we do again this analysis, it is the same test that we've had before. It's just that this one fastest test, that's why we call it least test steps to test the target, is not produced. This fewest test is whatever we believe what the users want to see in the first place. So whenever you create a new project, the project option that will be selected by default is fewest tests, right? Which is different to the previous versions where we've had fewest tests to test steps to targets. Okay. So then a second thing is the time limit. So by default, as you can see, we have used the time limit of 10 minutes. So this is, we think, a good time. But however, you may, for bigger models, need to change this and use higher or more number of minutes for this. But then you should just handle it here. The maximum look-ahead depth is an advanced testing option where we say expert users can use this in order to still terminate test generation if wanted on look-ahead depth. It's also a required feature for us to be backward compatible and reproduce the same results with older Conformiq versions. So when you update a project and you have modified the look-ahead depth button in your Creator 2.3 or 2.2 project, then after the update, this maximum limit will be set to whatever you had that knob set to. So let's say I used 8, right? So then, your project will be converted and show these look-ahead depth to 8. This is only produced, again, to reproduce the test set that you have had, right? If you want, and what we suggest is that you actually set this maximum look-ahead depth to 0 in order for letting Conformiq figure out the correct look-ahead depth. The reason why we've removed the look-ahead depth option has been that users have not been very comfortable in choosing the right setting. So setting your look-ahead depth to 0 in existing old version projects or projects that have been upgraded, we suggest to set it to 0. Okay. Fine. Final point I want to hit is the data distribution feature. So when we look at the tests that are currently generated, okay, then we see this data distribution has been achieved. Fine. What we can do also now is that we can see what happens when we click the data distribution feature. So this is in the Conformiq options. We open the advanced options. We enable the data distribution. So once we have the data distribution enabled, what that helps us doing is that whenever we have here, for example, values in our list that have no kind of constraint. So right now we are of course saying whenever I'm Stefan and Armin, I get to exit through the successful login, otherwise I get to the invalid login. Then this option helps us to take for the values which are not constrained. So for example, Yori is not used anywhere in XYZ. It helps us to generate better data distributions across multiple tests. So in order to actually show this, we will even introduce this additional option that we have just learned about, which is the combinatorial action. So I will not only generate the tests based on the standard coverage, but actually will want to see all the pairs. And again, we have the data distribution enabled. We go to test design settings, and now we go through this test generation. First, we load the model. And by the way, also one thing that we can notice here is there have been changes to the logs in the progress panel. I mean, we have been getting a lot of questions as to what kind of optimization are we doing when we're doing test generation, and here we have a first attempt to kind of shed some more light on this. So, for example, here we see now in the new logs that for example, before we've had 5 test cases which have been produced towards the user covering this in an optimal fashion. We actually started with 88 test cases from the test generation to get people an idea what kind of optimization has been achieved by applying the different optimization techniques such as the fewest tests which we have used here. So here, for example, we see now that we have here 2 users. One is Armin and Stefan, and the data distributions are even. So actually, if we turn off this option, what we would see is that it would prefer to first always go through and select Armin as the guide to log in. But now we can see is that the data distribution of covering these different usernames is basically even. And this also holds for the other data. The crosses are, as you can see, evenly distributed. Okay, again, what needs to be said about data distribution, it is dependent on your model construction as to what Conformiq can actually do to distribute data. As soon as you have conditions on the data that you want to distribute, which is alternative values in input constraints, right, they have an effect on the ability to actually be able to generate even distributions. This is not just a blind kind of distribution, but it's a distribution in respect to all of the constraints and other things you have in your model. Okay, that leaves us now with 6 minutes for the final topic of this webinar, which is the new integrations. So here I want to just quickly kind of give a glance over 2 things that we have done. The one big thing is that we have been introducing a productized version of integrating with a test automation tool called Tricentis Tosca, which is popular in the enterprise IT space. There we support the import of recorded screens from Tosca and the export then also of automatic tests, which leading then to their execution. And the second point here is also that based on customer requests, we have added a new feature to our web service importers that allows you not only to use files, but also URLs as sources for importing schema or, let's say, web service definitions such as WSDL, WADL, and XSD, etc. Okay, let me go back to my demo. So this is the final one. Basically here, I don't have Tosca installed on my machine, but what I can tell you is that this diagram here that we see is a e-commerce application that has been recorded with Tosca, and basically how that has been done is similar to this. These screenshots here that I've prepared. This is on a different application, but it's the same principle. So in Tosca, you can basically start to select the web page you want to record. You get a dump of what's in the on the web page. You can then go and click and select the elements that you want to have imported to create structure diagrams for in Conformiq Creator. And then the next thing is that, okay, so this is the so-called automation module after the scanning operation. So basically these modules, automation modules from Tosca, we can now import into Conformiq Creator, and they will be turned into structure diagrams. Yes, and so this import then works as such that we use an importer. I can also show this now in the tool. So basically here you click on write, import, and then you choose from the importers the Tricentis Tosca T-Box modules. And then here basically we use the REST service that's provided by Tosca to communicate with the tool to extract the automation modules. You have to specify the different settings such as workspace name, username, etc. And then basically when you click finish, this diagram here is automatically created for you. And then we have here an example where separately I've used the manual test importer, where from Excel we have, which is our Excel manual test importer, where we have actually imported a couple of tests which have been specified in Excel. This has generated us a diagram which has been with custom actions, as with textual versions we cannot yet produce the automation information. So here's one example where we have basically taken the scans done by Tosca and then used this to refine the model into basically replacing the custom actions with the actual actions on the interface. And now we're in a position to use the Tosca scripter, which again uses the REST-based service to export the generated tests, then back out so here we have 6 tests being generated, and then when we click the render, the tests will be exported to Tosca. And here again, let me just show that briefly. So this is still the import. When it comes to the export, again, basically the Tosca scripter automatically connects with Tosca via the REST service, deletes any existing test cases that have been previously exported, and then deletes the tests and closes the project. And then basically in Tosca you see the tests as such. They're automatic test steps because they're linked to the automation modules already for you. You don't have to do anything. Basically the only thing you need to do is you need to execute the test. And as you can see, also verification actions are there, click actions are there. So everything is ready for execution. Okay, so much about Tosca and Tosca integration. So the 2 takeaways here are that there's now an importer for creating structure diagrams automatically from Tosca recordings, and there's also a scripter which then can take models that use these actions generated from the structure diagram to create automatically executable tests. The final thing is the URL, and that is also quick to show. Again, we are importing. We can select, for example, WSDL definitions, and then we select our project. Here we have a new function where we can add a URL. As you can see, I've already added one, which is a application we often use in demos, which is called Parabank. And basically then the next thing is that, via the internet now, so via the URL, we have downloaded this web service, and we can select now, which messages. So from here, it's the same as using a file. It's just that the previous step, we have used the URL, and then we can basically generate a structure diagram from this. So this is the same as basically there has been already existing from previous versions in terms of the the import and the layout, etc. And that closes basically that demonstration of the big features regarding to the integration. Thank you for joining this meeting. Bye-bye.